The movie starts in New York City, focusing on a skyscraper called the Millennium Building. Inside, two lecherous security guards are using a telescope to spy on sex workers in a nearby building. Summoned by their boss, they head to the elevator. One guard takes a bathroom break while the other waits and notices the elevator behaving oddly, with his flashlight getting crushed by the doors. Before he can investigate further, his colleague returns, and they both enter the elevator. The following morning, we meet two elevator mechanics, Mark and Jeff, employed by an elevator company. Mark gripes about his mundane job, prompting Jeff to remind him to be grateful, as he had secured this job for Mark, and urges him not to mess it up again. Meanwhile, a group of pregnant women enter the elevator at the Millennium Building after their exercise class. Instead of taking them to the intended floor, the elevator descends rapidly. In panic, they try to press the open button and call for help, but nothing works, leading to two women going into labor. Building officials quickly become aware of the crisis. Two workers attempt to pry open the door but fail. A security guard, learning his pregnant wife is trapped inside, frantically tries to break the door with an axe. The door finally opens on its own, revealing that two women have given birth inside. The scene shifts to Mark and Jeff at a diner for breakfast. Their meal is interrupted when Jeff gets a call about the malfunctioning elevators in the Millennium Building, forcing them to leave immediately. At the same time, a young journalist named Jennifer is called into her boss's office. He briefs her on the elevator incidents and sends her to cover the story urgently to outpace their rivals. Jennifer arrives at the building and sees women being loaded into ambulances. She tries to interview them but is rebuffed by the medical staff. Mark and Jeff also arrive at the Millennium Building and are briefed by a staff member on the incident. The man mentions Jeff's former colleague, Kowalski, who had done something terrible, which irritates Jeff. They begin inspecting the machinery in the engine room but find nothing amiss after hours of checking. Elsewhere in the building, a blind man and his dog leave a salon. He notices the elevator buttons aren't functioning and decides to use another one. Tragically, when he opens the door, he finds nothing but an empty shaft. Despite his dog's barks of warning, he doesn't realize the danger and falls into the shaft, pulling his dog with him. That evening, Mark visits his girlfriend's house to apologize with flowers after a previous fight. Shockingly, he finds her in bed with another man, leaving him heartbroken. Meanwhile, at the Millennium Building, two security guards are alerted to the elevators acting up again. They investigate and find an elevator door opening and closing erratically. One guard looks inside and sees the dog hanging from a rope in the shaft. Before he can report it, the door suddenly closes on his head. Despite his partner's attempts to help, the elevator descends, leading to his gruesome decapitation, horrifying his partner. Afterward, Mark returns to the building, and Jennifer follows him into the restroom. She questions him about the elevator issues for her news article, but Mark brushes her off, insisting that everything is fine. When she continues to press him, he sarcastically remarks that elevators have a penchant for killing people and that 1 in 10 who use them might die. Dissatisfied with his response, Jennifer trails him, but security restrains her. Later, Jeff and Mark have a meeting with the building manager, Milligan, and other executives. They ask about the elevator inspection results, and Jeff reports that they conducted a thorough check, but found no defects. Mark suggests shutting down the elevator for a few days to allow for a more detailed investigation, but Milligan rejects the idea, citing significant financial losses. Jeff concurs with Milligan, assuring everyone that the elevator is safe. The next morning, Mark is stunned to see that Jennifer has published his picture in the newspaper along with his comments, claiming that elevators are dangerous. His boss, Mitchell, calls him into the office to address his remarks. Mark apologizes, explaining that he was joking and didn't expect her to take it seriously. Mitchell reveals that the police now view Mark as a suspect because of the article. Mark then sees Jeff arguing with a man in a lab coat. Jeff explains that the man is Dr. Steinberg, the designer of the elevator's electronic components. Mark also learns that Jeff's former colleague, Kowalski, had tragically set himself and his car on fire. Meanwhile, two skateboarders enter the Millennium Building's garage. One of them collides with a car and sits on the floor, injured. Suddenly, the elevator door behind him opens and pulls him inside, taking him to the 86th floor, from where he is thrown out to his death. Later, Mark watches the news and learns that the police have ruled the incident as a suicide. He rushes to the building to investigate, but the guards deny him entry. He spots Jennifer among the journalists and approaches her. She apologizes for the article, explaining that she had no other story to cover. Mark forgives her, but asks her to avoid mentioning him in the future. That evening, Jennifer unexpectedly visits Mark at his home. She shows him CCTV footage of the skateboarder's death, which is very peculiar. She highlights that the elevator ascended 86 floors in less than 2 seconds, whereas it typically takes 40 seconds to a minute. Mark is alarmed and baffled by this information. They attempt to show the footage to Jeff, but he is distracted and drives off without listening. Later, at a restaurant, Mark explains to Jennifer how different parts of the elevator function. He mentions Dr. Steinberg, who designed the elevator's electronics for their company. They go to Jennifer's office to research Steinberg and find that his first name is Gunther. He once worked on a project to create organic computer chips using dolphin brains, which went disastrously wrong, leading to his dismissal. Steinberg then joined the elevator company due to his expertise in the field. Convinced that Steinberg is linked to the mysterious deaths, Jennifer decides to investigate further. The next morning, Milligan discovers Jeff's body in an elevator shaft while wandering around the building. When Jennifer and Mark arrive, they are horrified to learn that the police have again ruled Jeff's death as a suicide. Additionally, the building executives brand Jeff as a terrorist, claiming the danger is over. Mark is convinced his friend could never do such a thing, so he and Jennifer decide to uncover the truth. That afternoon, they visit the home of Kowalski, who had died some time ago. There, they meet his widow, who reveals that her husband was not killed in a car accident. She explains that he was murdered in an elevator shaft because he knew something he shouldn't have. According to her, his spirit still haunts the elevator, causing the constant deaths. Meanwhile, back in the building, a group of people enter the elevator, which soon begins accelerating uncontrollably. Someone frantically presses the emergency button, but it fails. Panic ensues, and a child soils his pants. Suddenly, the floor split, and people plummet into the shaft to their deaths. The elevator then speeds up further until it crashes through the roof. Following this catastrophe, the President of the United States calls it an act of terrorism, and a SWAT team is deployed to secure the building. In the meantime, Mitchell confronts Steinberg, blaming him for the disaster. Steinberg dismisses it as a minor setback in his grand vision to transform humanity. Mitchell, disbelieving, demands a quick solution, but Steinberg admits the situation has spiraled out of control. That evening, Jennifer arrives at the building in a van with Mark hidden in the back. She claims to be from the elevator company, but the guards insist on inspecting the van. Jennifer reluctantly complies and steps out to open the door. At that moment, she gets a call from her colleague, who has been investigating Steinberg. He reveals that after being fired, Steinberg continued his work on biochips, though not using dolphin brains, but something else, and warns her to be careful. While this happens, Mark sneaks out of the van and enters the Millennium Building. Soon, the cops realize that Jennifer isn't from the elevator company and detain her in a room. Meanwhile, Mark discovers a massive biochip resembling a giant brain in an elevator shaft. This living organ is controlling the elevators. He tries to destroy it with a screwdriver, but narrowly escapes when a burning elevator descends towards him, killing a SWAT officer who was just exiting the shaft. Mark finds the officer's missile launcher and attempts to destroy the biochip, but Steinberg arrives, pointing a gun at him to protect his creation. They struggle, and Steinberg nearly kicks Mark into the shaft. Jennifer arrives in time, holding Steinberg at gunpoint. The SWAT team then bursts in, ordering everyone to drop their weapons. Steinberg seizes Jennifer as a hostage, but she breaks free. Moments later, Steinberg is attacked by his own creation and pulled inside the biochip, along with Mark. Jennifer manages to pass the missile launcher to Mark just in time. He uses it to destroy the organ, and the explosion propels him out while Steinberg's mutilated body falls moments later. The scene shifts to several days later, showing Mark leaving the hospital after recovering. Jennifer comes to pick him up, and as they leave, they get trapped in an elevator. Jennifer panics, fearing the demon has returned, but Mark starts laughing, revealing it was just a prank. The movie ends with him pulling her closer and kissing her.